Howdy, folks. Greetings. Now, episode 6 of the podcast was meant to be with Helena. Those of you probably know her from her YouTube channel, No Justice. Unfortunately, when it came to record, this happened. Now, for audio listeners, basically that's a bunch of roadworks that decided to appear right outside my house, making an absolute racket. You can't plan for these things, but we will reschedule for another time. But in the meantime, I thought I'd put up our previous conversation that we had a couple of years ago, which is actually still very relevant to the conversation today. I hope you enjoy. Okay, greetings and welcome to another Van Man Talks live stream. Now, I'm very excited today because I have one of my favorite YouTube channels, political YouTube channels. I'm making my way through my favorite YouTube channels of guests to come on. And one of my favorites, No Justice. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I've been a massive fan of your channel. I said to you earlier, you
Yeah.
commented on one of my Mick Lynch videos, and I popped over to your channel and started checking out your videos. And I love your stuff. And we're going to get on to, the overriding theme of the video. I think is we're going to be talking about the centre and left divide in the Labour Party. But first, I'm really interested to know your sort of political background, because you do seem to have like a wealth of knowledge on politics, not even just politics but economics as well. And I'm curious where that comes from, what your sort of political journey is, and how you
I
started your
mean,
channel as well.
yeah. So I mean, the first election I voted in was 2010. So that was when I was in
Big
second
one.
year of university. I think I was. So it would have been first year university. And so this was a big turning point politically, because this was coming up at the point at which people who were reasonably left wing were getting frustrated with the Labour Party. For example, in the wake of the Iraq War, and Charles Kennedy from the Liberal Democrats was someone who was always fighting against that. And when one of the big conversations was about tuition fees, and Liberal Democrats were promising to get rid of tuition fees in their manifesto for 2010, I voted Liberal Democrat in the first election I ever voted in, and God knows that was a terrible decision.
That's what I was about to
um,
ask you. Being a student in 2010, I imagine you probably voted for the Lib Dems along with a lot of
100%,
other
100%.
people.
There's a very famous question time moment, right, where this woman who's in the crowd, who's in asking question time, talks about how people won't answer questions, and how people like that she calls David Cameron Teflon Dave, and how things don't stick between him
Oh yeah,
between him
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and, and Gordon
I
Brown, right?
remember.
And then Nick Clegg was kind of shining in the middle with not being put under enough scrutiny because people were too busy to think about the kind of political duopolies. That's probably caught in a lot by that. But in general, I think being politically active and starting my political activity just after the global financial crisis, like a lot of millennials, right? I'm 31 now. A lot of us, all our formative understanding outside during adulthood, our lives in the world of work, our lives dealing with public services, have all come in the wake of the global financial crisis and the austerity program of the Cameron and Osborne administration. And so that's probably where a lot of my political opinions come from. I think the material conditions that have been created for the millennial generation shapes a lot of our politics, right? Especially when you think about how the Blair administration got a lot of people into university under the promise that if you get to university, you get your good job. Then suddenly, with the economy that we've built over the years of New Labour, that will then pay dividends later on. But then global financial crisis happened, austerity happens, and suddenly that all disappears, and we move into a world of casualised workforces, of gutted public services, of a incredibly loose labour market where there are very few jobs to be able to get. And suddenly there's a huge there's a massive number of graduates that are existing who can't participate in the labour market properly. And the things that they were sold by, the promises of the new Labour administration just weren't there anymore. And that's probably what made me as left-wing as I am today.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If you started in 2010, I guess you sort of gradually, as more austerity kicked in during the 2010s, just started just naturally leaning more left.
100%.
Well, yeah, I mean that gets on to what we mainly want to talk about. Your recent videos I've really enjoyed. You've done a lot of stuff on the striking at the moment, which has been really great. But you've also done some videos about MP selection in the Labour Party, how more centre
MPs are being chosen for their constituencies. Obviously, you had the Labour Files documentary recently. Also today, very fresh today, I think Starmer again came out and said that Corbyn won't be standing in his
Yeah.
constituency. Novara Media today we're talking about. I think you beat Novara Media to the to the point on this one. They were talking about the selection process today. I think you done a video about it a couple of days ago. But your recent videos on this has really got me thinking, because I have just been back and forth with Keir Starmer's leadership on Labour ever since he got in. For me, he takes one step forward and two step backs all the time. As soon as I think I feel hopeful that I can support him, we get a Labour conference where he's talking about British energy and things like that, and I think, oh, this is great. And then the Labour Files comes out and the MP selection stuff comes out, and I think, oh God, and I flip back and forward all the time. But your recent videos and the things that you've brought up, I guess your overriding message really is, do you feel that Starmer just is so comfortable because of first past the post? He knows, unless something really drastic happens, he knows that it's near on a foregone conclusion that he's going to be the next prime minister. Do you just feel that he's just so comfortable now that he can just do what he wants?
I mean, the ironic thing is that you're 20 points ahead in the polls, right? You don't have to kind of kowtow to this new kind of neoliberal framing of everything. Once you're that far ahead in the polls, you can start actually, having some kind of contrary narrative to the prevailing consensus that's existing, with regards to policy at the moment, right? But he doesn't do that. He just essentially parrots like there was a lot of people on the conservative right who were talking about how they felt like Jeremy Hunt's budget was something that you could see Keir Starmer doing, and I fundamentally agree, right? Some infrastructure spending, some tax increases. And when previously, 4 or 5 years ago, whatever, the conversations we were having were about, macroeconomic stuff, about how we changed, the base of the economy, really. When we talk about huge swathes of nationalisation, when we're talking about changing, the way we look at employment, things like the inclusive ownership fund, right? These are big, large scale changes to the economic structure of society. And now the discussions that we're having in Parliament are whether or not non-doms should be taxed or not. Which,
Mm.
sure, I agree. I agree with Keir Starmer about non-doms being taxed and about taxing private schools. But the problems that we're facing as a country and as an economy that are going to only get worse unless we take drastic action. I don't know if you've watched Gary's Economics. He has a really good channel on this, where he's
I
talking
haven't,
about
no.
the wealth disparity that's been created, especially during the pandemic, where lots of money has been essentially gone up the chain into the pockets of the people who own all the businesses in the country. And the money from there has been pumped into the housing market specifically, right? We've all seen what's happened to the housing market over the last 20 years or so, and that's only gotten worse, right? And people who've always expected the pandemic to cause a housing crash, that never materialized, because again, it's something that's so fundamental to the economy, as we learned in 2008, that it's always going to be a good investment at that point. And that's where I find a lot of frustration. I mean, the thing is that Keir Starmer's platform that he was standing on to be Labour leader was something that basically everybody in the Labour Party could get behind. It was very true to core Labour values. I think it's important to understand that the Labour Party as an electoral force has always been some kind of alliance of convenience between Social Democrats and Democratic Socialists, right? So Keir Starmer saying, "I fundamentally believe in these." So remember the 10 pledges that he did, right? Talking about strengthening trade union laws and a greener economy and uh, the rights of EU citizens in the UK and nationalising rail, mail, water, energy, things like that. Nobody in the Labour Party should, theoretically, under the kind of ideological platform of the Labour movement, should really disagree with that. So when people were voting for him, they were voting on the platform that he was giving. But then when he turns around and starts breaking these pledges publicly, that is some that we. I mentioned when the pre-stream, when we were chatting with each other, I'm a bit of a utilitarian, right? But one of the things that I have a kind of axiomatic belief in is the sanctity of democracy, right? And if you're being elected as a leader on a platform that you're essentially creating a platform that people in the party are going to vote for you, right? And then you suddenly turn tail and then start breaking those pledges, then how else can you be trusted moving forward as a politician with huge amounts of political power? And you mentioned before about, for example, the ways in which left-wing candidates in MP selections are being removed from long lists over incredibly spurious things like liking a Nicola Sturgeon tweet or following the Greens on Twitter.
Oh yeah, I mean it's certainly he's got an agenda. But do you feel that he's following his true politics now, or he does believe in the pledges that he put forward, but he just doesn't think that that's electable, that he needs to push out any sort of stench of Corbyn socialist to be elected? So what's his
I
core? What does he? Because he was
Yeah.
very supportive of Corbyn when Corbyn was leader, right? So do you just feel that he's following this path because he believes it's the way to get elected, and it's not
I
actually how he feels?
I mean, there's two possibilities. I can't divine inside Starmer's head as much as I wish I could, but
I know, we don't. That's the big
yeah,
question.
yeah,
We'd all
it's all
love to.
speculation at the end of
That's
the
what
day,
so many people want to
But
know.
yeah, but at the end of the day, right, either he's lying to the members or he's lying to the public, right? I understand politicians lie, whatever, that's always going to happen. But when we were going through this huge period where Boris Johnson was being castigated, and rightly so, for lying to the public and the House over huge swathes of things, right? And then we've got somebody who's trying to be the kind of the opposite to that, trying to take us back. He's already promised that he wants politics to be far more sincere, right? People are looking for sincere politicians when we've had 12 years of people lying and stealing and cheating and being corrupt. So for him to then essentially being in this position where he's lying to somebody, we just don't know who, and that's not good for democracy if we can't trust the people that we're trying to put into positions of power. But what I think about his positions, I genuinely think that he is a career politician who wants to win power. I do think that he wants to see positive social change. I don't think that there are many politicians who don't have at least some idea of the positive social change that they want to see. But first and foremost, I do believe he's a career politician because, when has he ever, outside of one trying to campaign for Labour leadership, espoused the principles that underpin the Labour movement? I've never seen that from him. And we live in a system, again, you mentioned before about the sanctity of first past the post, where we have a duopoly. We have two parties, the only two parties that get into government in the vast majority of seats in this country. If you want to be a politician, if you want to become an MP, you have to run in one of these two parties, right? That's why you see a huge disparity in both parties between, MPs who get elected. For example, the membership in the Conservative Party is much further to the right than the actual parliamentary Conservative Party. That's why they elected Liz Truss as leader, despite the fact that she didn't really have the support of the MPs in Parliament. And likewise, I think that a lot of the PLP are much more to the centre of the actual Labour membership, which is why Labour membership kept choosing Jeremy Corbyn. And the reason is because if you want to become an MP, you have to join one of these two parties. And so you just kind of join whichever one that you're slightly more ideologically in line with. But,
it's interesting what you say there, especially with the Labour membership. I mean, Jesus, it blew out of all proportion when Jeremy Corbyn came in with the youngsters joining up for the Labour Party. People obviously want these style politics, but it was always really interesting what you said about being sincere, and that's what so many people want that in a politician now, don't they? Especially after Boris Johnson. But I've never got a whiff of sincerity from Keir Starmer, because for better or for worse, he wants to win, and I'd love politicians to always say what they want and what they really believe in, and I'd like that from a Labour politician, and I don't think I ever not got that from Corbyn. I think, love him or hate him, I don't think he was ever not sincere. But I just feel that Keir Starmer has just got this thing where he just has to win. Obviously, he has to win, and he's got some very dodgy tactics to do it. And I don't know what he'll do when he gets in power. I don't know what the final manifesto for Labour will be. for the next election. We don't know that yet, but some of the games he plays, especially around Brexit and stuff like that, with not really giving his true opinion on things, is very,
Mhm.
very frustrating.
100%. Especially when, in the lead up to the leadership election, he was saying that we have to extol the virtues of freedom of movement by rejoining the single market. And then that's just something that's completely being trashed, right? Like, I'm not a Brexiteer, but again, I believe in democracy. I believe the referendum results should be honoured, right? But you can be within the single market and not be within the European Union. That is fulfilling the
And
mandate that was given by the
I
referendum,
think
right?
that's a happy compromise. I mean, obviously, I'm a staunch Ramona. Many of my videos on my channel are about Brexit. But I've always thought that is a generally good compromise, really, seeing as the vote was so close to come out of Europe and stay in the single market and customs union. But anyway, Brexit aside, Starmer, do we underestimate how difficult it is for Labour to win an election, though? With the loss of Scotland, um, he seems to be doing a lot of things that are still trying to appeal to that Brexit vote. Recently on immigration and stuff, he come out and said, we don't need to rely on cheap labour, which I actually agree with, really. But he's appealing to that sort of vote, isn't he? I think he wants those northern towns back, those Brexit voting northern towns. So that seems to be his tactic. He knows that those safe seats in London are still going to vote for him. I'm going to still vote for him. Of course I am. I'm in a seat that's very, very tight Tory Labour. I'm going to end up voting for him. I am. That's just the thing. So, yeah, do we underestimate actually how difficult it might be for Labour to win an election with the loss
And
of
I think
Scotland? And he
I
has to
think there
target
is,
those
yeah.
seats.
Yeah, for sure. I do think you're right about the electoral calculus that he's engaging in, right? Like, to make a kind of parallel, the electoral calculus that Tony Blair did in the 1997 election was, well, post right to buy, there's now a huge swathe of the population who were previously didn't have any assets that they owned that have now been gifted assets by the Thatcher administration selling off council houses on the cheap. So we now the swing voter is now the people who are homeowners, right? Those have been the swing vote essentially for the last 25 years, have been people who are homeowners, people who have multiple property wealth, right?
Mm.
Because everyone who rents is basically all voting Labour at this point. So there's no point in kind of pandering to them anymore. But the
So
issue is
do you
right,
think the people they're targeting has actually changed slightly since the Blair era? Is he
uh,
targeting different Labour? Got to target different people now.
I actually think that it hasn't changed that much. I still think that these are the same kind of people that they are trying to target, those kind of swing voters. Again, we're strangled by first past the post, in which basically every single constituent comes down to trying to appeal to a swing vote. That's why neither party has any policy platform that does anything for young people, because they know that they don't have to bother trying to appeal to them. A, because they don't vote, and B, because if they are going to vote, 80% of them vote Labour already anyway. So what's the point in making policies that appeal to them? Which is why in that video that I said about, how far does Keir Starmer have to go before people stop voting for him, we're like, well, hang on a minute. If you don't say to the Labour Party, unless you give us some kind of policy platform that's going to appeal to us, we can't lend you your vote on a utilitarian basis anymore, because all we're doing is cutting off our nose to spite our face, right? And when we're talking about, you mentioned northern towns and things like the red wall seats, these are naturally conservative seats now. When you look at the demographic shift that we've seen, where in these kind of suburban or slightly kind of suburban rural red wall seats, they basically only vote Labour because of how much they got burned by Thatcher in the 80s, right?
Mm.
The decline of manufacturing, the decline of northern towns in general, Accrington, Burnley, Chester, places like that. And it's a miracle and these people have gotten older. They're all homeowners, right? Their material interest is with voting Conservative now, but they stuck with Labour for a very, very long time, and they swapped their vote in 2019 because Boris Johnson promised them that they were going to get levelled up, which obviously never happened. But it was the first time a Conservative politician he was outside of the Conservative mould. He was outside of the traditional economic model of the Conservative Party as well. He was very much a kind of centrist economic platform rather than neoliberal economic platform that we'd seen previously. So I do think that it's going to be very difficult to win an overall majority as a Labour candidate. But at the end of the day, right, what you want to be doing is you want to be able to create positive utility with the policies that you put in place, right? If you have to compromise every single value that you have to be able to get into power, you've not done anything with the power that you've gained, right? If your immigration platform is the same as the Conservatives, or to the right, as far as Nigel Farage is concerned, right? Nigel Farage has been on Twitter, on his YouTube channel, talking about how he believes that Keir Starmer is now to the right of the Conservatives on immigration. Or if you're not going to be repealing the anti-strike clause that Rishi Sunak's going to come in, right? Like how, like what are you doing with that power? That's why I get very frustrated with the Labour Party, not just because they don't feel like they want my vote, and not only because they don't feel like they want my membership. They don't like. I'm not a Labour member, but I'm a member of an affiliated union, so I still contribute financially to the Labour Party, and it feels and like unless I stand my ground on this one, how am I ever going to see those policy platforms being put in place that I feel are necessary to create the large scale change that's needed to fix society?
So to play devil's advocate here, I mean, I think the overwhelming voice would be that Labour had their chance with Corbyn, with 2 elections, to put forward more socialist policies. I mean, we know he got a bad rap. We know the media campaign against him. We know all the things that went against him. But that would be the general consensus, that Labour had their chance to have those sort of politics. And now the only chance to win is to do more of Starmer's policy and going back to the Blair years. And it's effective because people of my age and older, they kind of like, I kind of feel that I get the impression when I'm talking to people that 12 years of Tory government has just been horrendous. And you know what? They'd kind of take a Blair style Labour government because it's a little bit better. They'd actually lap that up like straight away. But I think you're right, and a lot of people that share your views is that that's not good enough now. I think we're in a position where we really need drastic change, and I'm starting to get on board with this way of thinking as well, because I was thinking like that. I was thinking, you know what, I'd just give me a Blair style Labour Party.
Yeah.
I'll take it. I would take it after 12 years of Tory government. But everything that's been going on with everything over the last 2 years, it just goes to show that we really do need drastic change, but without proportional representation. We're always going to have that choice, and I think
Yeah.
the Labour Party only seems to be electable with a more centrist. But whether you agree with it or not, I don't know. I mean,
But I genuinely think that there is a compromise position, right? Like this has to be prefaced somewhat in the media discussion around Corbyn, as you mentioned previously, was very I mean, they just lied. They just lied constantly about him. But they were scared. They were scared of his political platform because a lot of the media institutions that we have at the moment have grown out of the understanding of what Labour was like in the 70s and 80s, right? That's the prevailing consensus, kind of received wisdom about what happens to Labour when the left get in control, because of the issues with what happened with militant tendency and the entryism that happened there from actual Trotskyists and communists trying to turn the Labour Party into the Vanguard Party, right? And that is kind of seared into the brain a lot of these high up media figures. And the political Overton window in this country has shifted so far to the right, where basically we have no public assets anymore. We have the NHS, we have education. Like, what else is there left to sell off at this point? Where we look at something like the platform that Jeremy Corbyn was actually putting forward in the 2017 and 2019 manifestos, which was some nationalisation, some cooperative funds, that kind of stuff. That's just social democracy. But that's so far to the left of where we are actually economically right now, rather than far to the left in a more kind of holistic sense, that it means that even something that was essentially, when you look at a European country, was bog standard social democratic platform, the media treated it like it was the Trotskyist entryist of the 1980s, right? And that's and the problem is that is a function of the Blair government. the Blair government was so centrist in its political platform that it lent credence to where the Overton window was post-Thatcher, post-neoliberalism. That's why Thatcher said that she believed that Blair was her greatest victory, because she'd won the economic argument about neoliberalism. A lot of the problems that we see now can be traced back to the failures of the Labour government. For example, the housing crisis, right? Council housing is the great leveller. It is the way in which that we can use to mediate the private rental market. It's only in 2011 that private rentals overtook social rentals in this country and has now ballooned out of proportion. But in 2004, during the Blair administration, only 120 council houses were built in the entirety of the UK. Thatcher, Major, and Boris Johnson, more council houses were built more during those periods of time. And the reason was an electoral desire for Blair to ensure that he was not impacting the asset wealth of the swing voter class in the country, which was, again, homeowners who got given homes by Thatcher during the 80s, or people who were beneficiaries of that in general, the way that housing was over-marketized during that period. Again, you couldn't. That's why you see at the moment, there's the big fight over the planning bill and the Theresa Villiers amendment, such that they're trying to ensure that housing targets get scrapped because they don't want to impact the swing vote, which is homeowners. It's a really kind of toxic political situation that we're in. And obviously, how do you try and win an election whilst also trying to implement good policy on top of that? It's very, very difficult.
I think that's one of the biggest failures of the Blair Labour government, not sorting out council housing, and it's shocking. And this goes back to what I said about life just being a little bit better as a taxpayer during the 2000s and the Blair government. All you can say really is life was a little bit better. They invested a bit more into public services, and they've done a bit more. I think that's what we're crying out to. But going back to what you're saying about no, go ahead.
I was going to make one point, sorry, is that it's also important to note out that during the Blair years, we were living off of the boom of kind of the fumes of the end of the financial sector, giving us loads of money. So I think, they did well with what they had, but PFIs were bad and over financialization of the economy was bad. But that's a bit of a digression. And the point I was going to make is that actually, I forgot what the point I was going to make now. Go ahead.
No worries. But yeah, bringing it back to the Labour Party. So we're saying that we need to find a happy medium, and you think we're talking about the media campaign on Corbyn. Do we not think that the same media campaign would go onto Starmer if he started announcing similar policies to that of the Corbyn reign?
I mean, I absolutely think that they would. And I think that, especially when you look at, I'm not going to talk about it now because it's a very contentious issue, but for example, the discussion around anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, this was, whether you think that there is legitimate grievances or not, which I believe that there some are, but not to the scale which was given, like potentially what Jeremy Corbyn thinks, and obviously there's anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, there's anti-Semitism in every party, but say that it's an endemic problem of the Labour Party specifically was not true. That's my opinion on that matter, right?
I think it was a whisper that was picked up on and then blown and utilised for their cause.
Yeah, but not just to try and scupper Corbyn's electoral chances, but to try and delegitimise the left as an economic ideological force in the country. And that's why I have such qualms with Keir Starmer engaging in his factional war, right? Someone who ran on a ticket of party unity, now after the Ford report, we know the people at Labour HQ were were spending time when they should be doing proper work, looking through people's Twitter profiles, trying to expel people, what they call trot hunting, quote unquote, right? And that's still going on essentially now. After calling for party unity, and now that we know the Ford report exists, they're still engaging in this nonsense factional warfare that they said that they saw the end of, right? Sure, they'll get party unity, and their idea of party unity is expelling everyone who they disagree with. And I think that is just, I could live with, as you said, a happy medium, right? I think that even as a leftist at this point, I would be happy supporting someone like Andy Burnham, for example, on the platform that he's espousing, right? He's admitted, right, when he was talking with Novara Media, that the Blair government got it wrong on nationalisation. And I think that's something big to admit, right? I don't think that Keir Starmer would ever admit that Blair got something wrong, because as far as Keir Starmer is concerned, Blair kept winning. And that's what matters as far as Keir Starmer is concerned. When he's asked who his favourite Labour leaders are, he always says Labour leaders who won. And I think that's a very telling answer for the kind of politics that Keir Starmer espouses. And
Everyone always
I
has
do
a lot of respect for people that admit their mistakes. I think it's
100%.
everyone thinks it's an admirable cause.
And I do think there is political sea change happening at the moment as well. I think that just as there always is, people realise the problems just slightly after it's been a little bit too late. What's happened with climate change, basically, we were being told about the issues of climate change 40 years ago when Exxon were hiding the studies that they'd literally done on their impact on the environment, and we're only now, in the last kind of decade, actually properly taking steps on the climate. And I think we're seeing that with regards to unionisation and with nationalisation now, for example. Mick Lynch as a media figure, right? He has been he's hugely popular in a way that, someone like Corbyn wasn't. 'Cause I think he's more relatable, right? One of my big problems with Corbyn as a person is I don't think that he was a particularly relatable politician unless you were someone who was already amenable to his point of view. Whereas Mick Lynch is straight talking, and he says it like it is, and it does help having an East London accent as well.
I've always thought that if you put him forward as Labour leader at that time instead of Corbyn, saying the things that Corbyn wanted to do, I think it would have had a different impact, because you can't help but not like that guy, and especially how good he is with the media, and he's just incredible. It's absolutely
And
incredible.
again, it's sincerity. And the thing is about him as well is that he is a union leader. He has no political ambitions other than to fight for the needs of the people who he represents. So when he comes on a media show, he's not trying to get some kind of access with a journalist, because I could go on for an incredibly long time about how incestuous the political and media class in this country is. He doesn't care about any of that. As long as he's coming on and doing what's right by his membership, he'll come on and tell it like it is. He'll tell the truth with sincerity. And that's not what you get from politicians at this point, because they are pretty lovey-dovey with the media class in this country as well. Like, I tweeted out, when I think Paul Brand from ITV tweeted about the Allegra Stratton scandal, where she was joking about the lockdown parties, and I was like, yeah, she used to work for ITV as a quote-unquote impartial political pundit, and now you're castigating her for what she did during lockdown. I'm like, the reason she had the access is because of the platform you gave her at ITV.
It's incredible. It really is. For me, everything that we've just discussed about the Labour Party and all the fighting that's been going on ever since Corbyn first come in, I mean, to me, there is obviously two factions that just sort of bitterly hate each other, and when you think that you're fighting the good fight, you go to drastic measures, which is what we saw with the centre of the Labour Party spreading the rumours of anti-Semitism, all the nonsense, all the stuff that we saw in the Labour files, because they think they're fighting the good fight. Now, whenever I talk about these issues, it seems I sometimes feel like I'm a broken record, because it always seems to come back to PR and first past the post, because that is obviously what the issue is. You've got two parties. You just have you got two parties, and I think the only way to get through this is to get PR. And could a Starmer Labour Party eventually get there? Maybe it will be his swan song when he leaves or something. I don't know, but is because he doesn't want to talk about it now. I've seen many interviews where it's been brought up, and he doesn't want to discuss the subject.
I mean,
but
it's not within his interest to do so, because it's what's put him into the position that he's in currently, and it's what will give him the Labour majority that he wants. It's not within his nor the party's interests, despite the fact that the party continually votes in favour of it at the conferences. And again, as I said, one of my main axiomatic beliefs is the fundamental belief in democracy, and Starmer continually undermines that, both through scrupulous and also unscrupulous ways too. Like it's open that he's just kind of disagreed with the party consensus around proportional representation. He's made his point that we want to be a transformative Labour government theoretically, so we need the power which to do so. Fine, whatever. But when it comes down to literally firing entire selection boards, forcing entire selection boards to within constituent Labour parties to quit in protest because of the amount of meddling in democracy that's going on a local level, like this is terrifyingly authoritarian. And that's the person who'll be giving a lot of power to in number 10. And that's where a lot of my reservations come from, as well as the policy platform as well too. Because again, the issue we have is one of narrativization. And if the narrativization is, for example, take the £40 billion black hole in the nation's finances, that is based upon recommendations from the OBR about how much debt has to fall as a percentage of GDP over a 5-year period, right? That's not set in stone. That's a recommendation by the OBR, right? From a kind of monetarist kind of fiscal perspective about, what we should be doing with the national debt. Most people, their understanding of inflation is about, they literally think more government spending equals more inflation. But when you look at, for example, Japan, their debt as a proportion of GDP is like 250%, and they've not had an inflationary pressure in the last 20 years, right? So that framing of that issue, saying we can't spend the money because it doesn't exist, what I was talking about before, this idea of the overall state budget being like a household budget, that's a narrative that should be fought against. That's a that's a media platform that narrativizes the necessity of austerity, and that's not going to be good for
Austerity
anybody.
is just a political choice to make.
Exactly.
It's not
Yeah.
it's not forced upon you, as we know from what we've dealt with for the last 12 years. Is incredible. But so with Starbucks, like I said, when you feel like you're fighting the good fight and you want to take all these drastic measures like he's done, and the abhorrent things that that we've mentioned, MP selection, all these things that are just so undemocratic and awful. I kind of feel like when he's in the headspace that he just thinks that the only way to win is eradicate any sniff of the left. And when we get into power, it doesn't matter. We're in power. We can do what we want. But I kind of see like this PR issue could be like the Tory Brexit. So David Cameron gets into power, and if the Conservative MPs are pushing for it enough, eventually they'll put enough pressure for him. Okay, I have to announce a referendum. I could see that with the current Labour Party, because I don't know how passionately you are about this, but I really am. I just think I don't think PR is going to solve all our problems, but I don't see us getting the government that me and you really want without it, because I see the only sort of style government that me and you want is something like I guess you'd have a Labour Party propped up with a more left-wing party. So basically the Labour Party as it is now, but the separations are there so that each party can do what they want to do and do the policies that they want to do. But I feel like maybe the only way to get there is to deal with a Starmer Labour government and just hope that the Labour MPs can really push this issue of PR, and where it becomes that he just has to do it. He has to.
And it's not a foregone conclusion that they have an overall majority already. Like the electoral mass is so skewed by not only boundary changes but demographic shifts, such that I think they need a 12% victory margin to get an overall majority in the Commons, which is crazy. So they may end up having to rely, if they don't get the 12-point lead, nothing certain at this point. They may have to rely on the Liberal Democrats to be able to get into power. And Ed Davey has already said that his single condition for a future coalition agreement with the Labour Party would be proportional representation without a referendum. So maybe that's something that happens. But I mean, I am happy for any kind of electoral reform. I actually prefer, as an electoral system, instant runoff voting rather than proportional representation. I like what they have in Australia because, again, not only do we need not only do we need to have, a future Labour Party backed up by a more left-wing party, we also need enough power within the Commons to be able to enact large sweeping legislation. And the issue with proportional representation is that to build the coalitions you need to make a government possible, drastic change becomes more difficult, because then you have to rely on the votes of people who are probably going to be more closer to the centre than you are, for example. So I like the idea of instant runoff voting, because it means that everyone gets to have their voter power increased. Everyone gets their vote counted at every election at the very least.
Yeah, so
Whilst
that's
also,
where everyone
yeah.
has to vote in
Oh no,
Australia.
that's where yes, so they have compulsory voting, but they also, instant runoff is where you rank your candidates, and then instead of having a runoff election, they just use your preference votes and then allocate it until there's only two candidates left. So, for example, if you look at the Australian election, the Labour Party got fewer first preference votes than the Liberal Party. But because the Greens got such a large proportion of the vote in Australia, all put Labour as their second preference. When you look at the two-party preferred vote, Labour were about 5 points ahead, 6 points ahead, and that's what gave them a majority in the House of Representatives that they have in Australia. I like that system, because everyone has higher voter power. Minority parties get more of a say and are more likely to be able to win seats, but the likelihood of there being a large enough electoral majority to pass legislation is also there as well. So there's there's positive sides and downsides to loads of different systems, but first past the post just is the worst. It's just bad and it needs to go.
Well, that's why it's so great right now, because if you can get to the stage where you're going to look at different ways and voting systems, you've just got an open book, and you can look at all examples, like you just said, with Australia, and so many different examples. I really do like in Australia that every citizen has to vote. I know a lot of people don't like the idea of being forced to vote. I mean, it's not really being forced, is it? I think you do get a fine if you don't, but you can also draw a giant cock on your ballot paper if you
Exactly.
want to.
Exactly,
You don't have to actually vote, but you actually have to fill out the form, and it means that political parties have to appeal to everyone, because that's the
Yeah.
problem in this country. We're only appealing to the people that we need the votes for, but if everyone has to vote, you have to appeal to absolutely everyone. What's
Yeah.
your opinion, talking about reform, what's your opinion on the House of Lords with Starmer's announcement that he's going to get rid of him?
It's one of the better announcements I've heard from Keir Starmer. I think that constitutional reform was already part of his platform, kind of nominally. So him announcing that as a policy prescription is good, and I think it makes sense electorally. I don't think anybody really likes the House of Lords, and
Yeah.
more democracy is good as far as I'm concerned. Plus, it gives you more space to have like a House of Commons elected by some kind of non-proportional but non-first past the post electoral system, and then having proper single transferable vote with a completely new electoral system for an elected second house, which would again I think would work pretty well. So yeah, absolutely. I absolutely despise the House of Lords, always have. Again, anything that's anti-democratic is something that I fundamentally disagree with, especially considering how open it is to corruption as well. You just look what happened with Michelle Mone, for example, and just and also you look back at cash for honours as well, all that kind of stuff. It's really ripe for corruption, and I think it just needs to go.
Yeah. Did he go into detail of what reform it would be? I mean, because
I don't
all I
believe
heard that
so.
he was going to scrap it. Did he actually go into detail? Would he keep it but have them elected? Or I, I don't know. I didn't.
I don't think he went into that, but I think it's almost certain that there would be at least some kind of democratic involvement in that, to be able to reform it somehow. I can't see how you do it without that, unless you did it, like jury service or something. Which I do. To be fair, I don't think that would be a bad idea. Actually getting people who have to live with the results of the policies having direct say into that, by and not have it and being put there by essentially at random, rather than
Mm,
having to, because if you're trying to get voted for, again, as we've talked about loads of times on the stream, we've had to talk about the kind of people you have to appeal to be able to get voted for. But if you're
yeah.
just selected at random, like jury, like jury service, for example, then you have your opinions already. You don't have to appeal to a mythical swing voter to be able to get into that position.
I like it. I like it. The thing is, though, this is the United Kingdom, and we don't really like doing incredibly drastically new things like and new ideas. We like to do things that have been hanging around for the last sort of 400, 500, 600 years.
No, true. That's true. Well, that was what was frustrating about the discussion around the Corbyn manifesto. In the everyone just thought, "Oh, what's the return to Labour of 1983?" And Michael Foot Part Two, and I'm like, no, no, no. Like, sure, there was a lot of nationalisation in there, but one of the best policies of the Corbyn platform was the inclusive ownership fund and the right to own. Now, the inclusive ownership fund would have transferred shares from companies with more than 500 employees. I think it was trying to get it up to 10% employee share ownership, which is a really good way of actually avoiding the cost of living crisis and avoiding inflation, because it means that workers are still, even if the profits go up because of inflation, they're still getting dividend payouts. So even if you can't get that, it minimizes the effects of price gouging inflationary pressures, because that will get put back into the workforce through dividends. And also means that there are then going to be workers on corporate boards, which means more representation for working class people in the corporate class, where the big dividers in this country at the moment, right? And the right to own is that if a company was going under, it would make workers in the company the buyers of first refusal to turn it into a cooperative. So if it was going to get floated on the stock market or was going to go into administration, at that point, the policy would have made that no. If the workers want to own the firm, they get first refusal on that, to try and influence the cooperative sector in the economy. I'm a big believer in worker cooperatives as an economic force, because I believe that it's best for working people in general, right? I think that, I mean, although my political platform is very social democratic, I am a Marxist, and I do believe that the fundamental the fundamental divide in our society is between, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, those who owns the means of production and those who are employed to operate the means of production, right? And by having more cooperatives, you are removing the bourgeois as a class. You have everyone who has to work together, who belong to the same class, so there is no conflict within that, which I think makes for a better society. So I would like to see more about the cooperative funds from the Labour Party moving forward. I mean, that was part of Neil Kinnock's manifesto in '92, and Neil Kinnock was seen as being another centrist kind of type. And so the fact that even that is too left wing for Keir Starmer, I find incredibly frustrating.
Well, I mean, everything that you just said there is I hear mirrored from so many young people in this country, and I guess my question to you is, how do you not make I don't want to say all the older generation, but your normal staunch sort of Tories not shit their pants basically over what you've just said and think, oh my God, we're going back to the 70s, we're going to communism, we're going to is that even possible? Or do we just have to accept I think the common trend, usually the common trend is more people get more conservative as they grow up, but I think that trend is rubbish now. I don't think that that's happening. I think as people are getting into their 30s and 40s, they're still sticking with their more left-wing beliefs. So
Yeah, and that's so. I think that paradigm was very specific to what was happening because of people's changing material needs and material interests post neoliberalism, right? Post the public sector sell-off, where boomers, who were the largest voting cohort, got gifted huge amounts from the public sector sell-off, from the demutualization of the building societies, all that kind of stuff. They just got gifted huge amounts of asset wealth, huge amounts of financial wealth, and they lived through the boom of the new Labour years as well. And so because they gained loads of asset wealth, they became more conservative because they had more to conserve. But now millennials are not getting that asset wealth as they grow older. And so there was a period. So before the 1980s, people voted with their class the vast majority of their life. Between the 1980s and 2010, between the start of neoliberalism and the economic crash, people were getting more conservative as they got older. But now that wealth is being more centralized and being more owned by the corporate class, for example, that paradigm has now ended again. And
yeah.
The oldest millennials are in their in their early 40s now. Elder millennials are, and they're just as left wing as they ever have been. In fact, millennials are the most left wing generation, more left wing than Zoomers, for example.
Yeah,
So
I agree. I think there's a massive shift. So
mhm.
well, we've got about 10 minutes left on the stream. I wanted to do an hour. There's a couple of things that I'm really interested in to ask you. First of all, I'd like to know, because all your videos that I've seen are on certain topics, and I love them. But I really want to try and sort of get to basically what you do, or what you'd like to see the Labour Party do right now. Pretend you're in power. You're you're Labour leader. What are sort of like your main sort of 5 things that you'd really like to see that this country drastically needs?
So nationalizing, actually, I think the important ones to nationalize is, first of all, is energy extraction, right? The energy crisis is being caused by the fact that we are having to buy our own gas and oil reserves at global wholesale prices because it's being privatized. If we had a state-owned energy company like Norway does, we would be able to have the oil and gas in the North Sea at at cost, just like Norway does, right? They have a 70% stake in Equinor, which is the state-owned gas extractor in the Barents and North Sea for Norway, and they don't have the energy problems we do, right? So that's one big thing. And actually, and
But before you
yeah,
move on, what? Sorry to interrupt, but what do you feel? Because Starmer has announced, I don't know nothing about it. We don't know anything about it. He's announced the British energy
GB
thing.
Energy, yeah.
Do we even know
Unfortunately,
anything about that? So that would be like him maybe sort of trying to enact what you're trying to say, but I don't know too much about it. I don't know whether he's actually talked too much about it, about what it would exactly look like.
what we know so far is that it's not going to be producing any energy of itself. What it's going to be is a way of creating public-private partnerships to invest in the green energy sector, which to me just screams PFI's Part 2. All it seems to me is just like a slush fund that they're going to use to invest in private sector green energy startups or whatever. I mean, Jonathan Reynolds, when he was on Laura Koensberg's show, literally talked about using it as a fund with which to unlock these markets, which to me just screams New Labour to me, unfortunately. PFI's Part 2, which is a shame, because when you initially announced the policy, I was like, this is encouraging, when actually it just seems like a yet another way in which we transfer even more of our public money into the private sector,
Mm.
which I find incredibly frustrating, because again, we should have more state, like the energy market is just something where it's a natural monopoly where marketization has just in general failed,
I
right?
think popular opinion is definitely there on that one. I think that
Exactly.
goes right now. Who the hell would not be in favour of nationalised energy in an energy crisis? I think that goes
Yeah,
across all political scales. I think that's popular.
100%. And
Um,
the polling will agree with you. There's a super majority of people who believe in that. Like, I would like to see things like Royal Mail and the water companies nationalized as well, but I think that is less important than the energy sector. The railways and energy, actually all public transport and energy, I think, are the two main things that need more nationalisation for. Like, good. That's why I like Andy Burnham a lot, because he's nationalised the buses in Manchester.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
is on the road to doing so. The second policy I think is really important is the cooperative funds that I was talking about. Things like the Inclusive Ownership Fund, the right to own, the Marcora law from Italy, I think would be a really good adoption and Labour Party platform. I don't know if you know about that, but in Italy, the Marcora law is that if you're on welfare payments, you can take a lump sum of welfare payments to create a new cooperative business with other people who are also on welfare payments. So you instantly all get jobs by creating a business together, which I think is a really good way of
Oh, wow.
incentivizing cooperatives, increasing our labour force participation rate, and also in general making getting us more more startup small businesses, which I think is a good thing, especially if they're cooperative rather than a traditional kind of capitalist model. So all the kind of policies incentivizing cooperatives are one of my big things as well. Third thing, council housing, more and more council housing. We need to get back. We need huge swathes of council housing. I cannot stress how many council houses we need. Like in the 1970s, we were building, hundreds of thousands of council houses every year, and at the moment we're building like 100. We need so many more than we have currently,
Yeah.
and they need to stay in the public sector. They cannot get sold off like they did before. Um,
It shouldn't, because we know everyone knows that was a disaster.
mhm.
I think that is another one of those things that goes across the political divide with council housing. I really
Mhm.
does. I think people will understand. No one can justify. I live in Brighton. £1,200 a month for a studio flat. You know, everyone knows that this is absolutely bonkers. Probably for a studio
Mhm.
flat that's going to be full of mold in the corner. It's another
Mhm.
one of those things that I think is a popular policy.
Exactly, 100%. Like, I think there's room as well for more incentivization of housing cooperatives as well as an alternative to private landlordism, but that would require a lot more, intricate policy. Similar to, I don't know if you've heard about the Preston model that they use in Preston Council, where they have cooperative funds available for that kind of stuff in Preston, which I think is really good. Community wealth building, something that's pushed by the New Economics Foundation. So they are a progressive economic think tank. Miata Farnbole, who's the leader of the New Economic Forum, is actually going to be the Labour candidate in Campbell and Peckham, one of the only actually properly left-wing candidates left who didn't get
Mm,
excised from the long list in the lead up. So because the biggest kind of like kind of moral vacuum that we have at the moment is the way that private landlords are being pandered to by policy, but explicitly the ways in which that we've incentivized HMOs, where people in the rental sector will pay huge amounts of money for a tiny room with shared living space, like they're a student, except these are people who are in their 30s, right? The ways in which we've taken proper family homes and just turned them into like incredibly cheap uh like HMO properties for private landlords to be able to scalp huge amounts of money. I think that's criminal, the way that we've
mm.
done that. But HMOs for young people to live in post, if they just graduate university or they're not going to university, that's a perfect thing to have as a housing cooperative, right? Loads of people living in a larger house, which is being done not for profit. And so uh, I think that would be a much better model
Yeah.
for short-term housing needs than the current private rental market we
It
have. But
just
I don't
goes to
think that's a
show
bigger issue. Yeah.
there's so many exciting new ideas that are coming to the forefront, and
Yeah.
I guess that's where we're leave the stream, because unfortunately I could talk to you all night, but I do have to go. I've got to go pick up my wife from work. She's a nurse. She's not striking. She's at work today. But I guess where I'll leave it is, what do you think about going forward to the future? Because I actually do. Um, I'm quite positive, because I think it's one of those things, when you hit rock bottom, there's only one way to go, right? And I think that's where we are
Yeah.
now. And I'm quite positive about the future. Yeah, we may have a few more years of rocky roads again, but all the sort of things that you've been talking about on this stream today, new, exciting, vibrant ideas coming forward from young people in this country. I do look forward. I do look positive towards the future. What are your thoughts going towards the future?
I think party politically, I'm super doom pilled on how party politics is going. But ideologically, I share your optimism, especially for the younger generation. We have I don't like there's a the Marxist in Marxism there's a the concept of the economic base that feeds into the superstructure, which is the cultural stuff that goes on top of the economic structure that we live under, and how the economic base is how we change that. Amusingly, Thatcher agreed. Like, she thought there's a famous quote of hers, which is, the method is economics, but the goal is to change the soul. And what that has done, and the Thatcherite economic paradigm has created, is everything is marketized, everything is a competition, everything is individualized and atomized. There is no such thing as society, right? And I think that economic and cultural paradigm has permeated through a lot of older people in this country. Again, not through nothing they've done consciously, right? I'm not going to blame them for actions that were taken outside of their control. But what I think that has done is created a generation of young people who've been stung by consecutive neoliberal administration for 43 years, who've neglected their needs, neglected what their own material needs moving forward. So much so that they've completely rejected that framing, right? They want a cooperative society. They want a cohesive society. They want us to. They value cooperation. They value cohesion within society, right? And I think that's why I have a lot of optimism for these people in general creating a better society at large, right? And the attitudes and the values that we have in society, I think, are really what need to change fundamentally, regardless of whether I think that we're going to get the policy changes that we needed on a party political platform and from an electoral platform as well. That's why we've seen this explosion in union membership, this explosion in interest in unionization, because unionization is a cooperative thing, right? People with a shared interest coming together to ensure that they have a better life for themselves. Which I have a lot of faith in young people because of that.
Yeah, I can't agree more. You know, I think everything. I know there's a lot of negativity with the unions at the moment, and we would like to take the piss out of a lot of right-wing pundits that are damning the unions. But I generally think the overriding support is for unions and what they're doing
100%,
right now. It
100%.
doesn't get publicized as much. What you see is the normal rags and the normal media outlets that are shooting down the unions right now. But if you actually generally just talk to people, real people, and the overwhelming consensus is the support for the unions. It really is. On that
100%.
note, like I say, I'd love to talk to you all night, but I do have to go, unfortunately. Thank you so much for coming on the stream. I will just have a little bit of a shout
Absolute
out
pleasure.
to the chat, because I am notoriously bad for ignoring the chat on the side. So I do apologize to all you guys watching. Thanks for coming on. I will get better. You're really good at this. I know from your videos that you're always engaging with your chat, but I still find it incredibly difficult to chat and read. It's kind of like doing that sort of thing. I
For sure.
Thanks everyone in the chat, and I'll check out your messages, and thanks all for watching. And yeah, thank you. If you guys haven't checked out No Justice channel, please go check it out. I'll put a link down below in the video. It's great. Videos are awesome, and
100%.
hopefully we do this again.
Absolutely, guys, in my chat, if you want to follow, it's at Vanman Talks on Twitter, and if you search Vanman Talks on YouTube, check them up. I think I've tagged you in the YouTube stream on my end as well, so you should be able to find your channel from there. And also, it's the same. Is the handle on Twitter, isn't it? Just Vanman Talks, all one word, right?
Yeah.
No
I
worries.
recently got back into Twitter. I kind of abandoned it for reasons that was kind of absorbing me too much, but then it just creeps back into your life, doesn't it? And you have to start using it again.
100%. I mean, Twitter is my promotional tool a lot of the time, really. That's why I got into Twitter, to promote the channel. But then you just get sucked into the discourse. It's terrible, but I try and have fun rather than get lost into a lot of the negativity on there, because it's not the Agora, it's just the Bird app. But also, if people want to find me on other platforms, I'm on TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's all the same handle, which is that one right there.
That's a good point. Actually, what age is the cutoff to be able to use Twitch? I feel like I'm coming to 40 years old now and I can't use Twitch. It seems like a really young person's platform, but that's your biggest platform, isn't it? You
technically, my biggest platform is now TikTok.
Okay.
Amusingly, I post clips from the streams on TikTok, and they get like hundreds of thousands of views sometimes. Like one clip I did reacting to PMQs, where Rishi Sunak said that Royal Mail was that was going to get funded by the taxpayer. And I was like, you privatized that in 2013.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I think you've done it as a short on YouTube as well.
I did. Yeah.
How many
I got like 130k views for that clip on TikTok.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. I wish I got paid for it, like I would on YouTube.
I know. Well, I actually got a YouTube short that's got 1.5 million views, where I just pasted Roy Keane remarking to Boris Johnson in Parliament, and it's got 1.5 million views, but it's a short. I don't get a penny for that. I don't get nothing.
No.
It's really frustrating. But anyway, on that note, I do have to go. Thanks again. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do it again sometime, because I really enjoyed that. It was a really good chat.
Amazing. I really enjoyed it too. Yeah, I'd love to have this conversation again sometime. I really appreciate the invite as well.